Good day, everyone, and welcome to ARNA Pharmaceuticals Corporate Conference Call. This call is being recorded. I will now turn the call over to Patrick Malloy, Vice President, Investor Relations at ARNA. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We hope you had a chance to review the press release we issued this afternoon announcing our year-end 2020 financial results. Joining me on today's call are Amit Munshi, our President and Chief Executive Officer, and Lori Stelzer, our Chief Financial Officer. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that we'll be making forward-looking statements that involve risks and uncertainties about our goals, expectations, plans, beliefs, timing of events, or future results, including those risks and uncertainties related to our pipeline, financial projections, 2021 financial guidance, and the COVID-19 pandemic and its potential impact on our business. Forward-looking statements involve certain assumptions, risks, and uncertainties that may be beyond our control and could cause actual results to differ materially from these statements. A description of these risks can be found in our earnings press release and our latest SEC disclosure documents. All forward-looking statements are based on information currently available to ARNA, and we disclaim any obligation to update these forward-looking statements. Now, I'd like to turn the call over to Amit Munshi. Amit?
Thanks, Pat, and thanks everyone for joining today. Let me go through a couple of key highlights here, and then we'll jump right into Q&A. Today, we reached another key milestone for the company in dosing our first participant in the Phase 2b Voyage trial for etrasimod in the treatment of eosinophilic esophagitis. So we're excited about continuing that program and look forward to seeing the results as we go forward. Earlier this month, we named Gary Neal, Dr. Gary Neal, as our chairman of the board, and added Nawal Uzrain to our board of directors, continuing our continued expansion as well as enhancement of our governance structures at ARNA. In January, we completed the Elevate UC52 trial enrollment in ulcerative colitis, and both the UC52 and 12 are on track for top-line data in Q1 2022. And we continue to monitor the impact of COVID-19 across all of our studies, but specifically UC12 and 52 as we continue those programs. In January, we also announced the introduction of Tomanigrel, a second cardiovascular program. And back in November, we had the atopic derm Phase 2b data readout. And thinking back to October 20, we had the Alornab Captivate data readout, and we expect data from the Alornab Captivate Phase 2b trial in abdominal pain associated with irritable bowel syndrome. We expect that data this quarter. So with that quick synopsis, let's move to Q&A.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask your questions, you may press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's star 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Your first question comes from the line of Alethia Young from Cantor. Your line is open.
Hey guys, thanks for taking two of my questions I have, and congrats on the continued progress throughout all these programs. The first one, obviously, Alornab, which is coming down the pike. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about this abdominal pain score and whether that's something that you think could be used in a pivotal study, or what kind of analysis would be needed there. And then just big picture, could you just talk a little bit about what's going on with the Crohn's readout and how we think about the probability of potential success there in light of what we've seen with ulcerative colitis? Thanks.
Sure. Hi, Alethia. Thanks so much for your questions. On the AAPS scale, a percentage of patients hitting a 30% plateau or 30% rate in the AAPS scale is the Phase 3 endpoint and is included in one of the endpoints in this study. So we'll be looking at, as with all Phase 2 studies, continuous variables, things like change from baseline in the AAPS compared to placebo, as well as categorical changes like percentage of patients getting to a 30 and a 50% threshold. And it is the same scale that will, should it work here, be used in the Phase 3 trial. As far as Crohn's is concerned, we're continuing progress on Crohn's. We expect data later this year from the sub-study A, As you recall, we're studying both 2 and 3 milligrams there, looking for a dose response and looking for some initial indications of directionality on the dose. In terms of the activity, we know that ozanimod showed activity in the Crohn's population. We know that drugs that have shown activity in UC tend to show activity in Crohn's. And recall that we're taking a higher dose of 3 milligrams in as well to see if there's some additional efficacy in this population that might warrant pushing the dose from 2 milligrams to 3 milligrams. So again, we're looking at 2 and 3 milligrams, and we look forward to seeing the data later in the year.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
Your next question comes from the line of Marty Oster from Credit Suisse. Your line is open.
Hey, Team Arena. How you guys doing?
Good. Hey, Marty.
Hey. Yeah, I wonder if I could follow up on Alethia's question on the Crohn's trial, just given that this is sort of just uncontrolled just with the 2 mg and 3 milligram dose arms. Could you comment a little bit in terms of how to think about interpreting that data and what sort of kind of historical placebo responses you've observed in Crohn's studies? And then also, if you had a dose response and success, would you think about a future UC study looking at the 3 milligram dose as well down the road, or is that something you think is going to be preferentially beneficial in Crohn's?
Yeah, the placebo rates have a little bit of a range, about 100-point change in CDI to 150-point range. Seeing about 100 to 150-point delta on top of that is considered a remission standard. So those would be what we would be looking for in terms of an aggregate response in this trial. And again, we've got analogs from ozanimod's open-label study. So we'll have at least a point of comparison in terms of being able to see if our activity is comparable or preferential to ozanimod. The 3 milligrams, it's interesting. This is the first time we're taking it into study participants, non-healthy volunteers. We're also going to be contemplating that dose as part of the broader atopic derm study, and we'll talk more about that as we get through the agency. And absolutely, if we start seeing that we're seeing increased efficacy, we're seeing the safety profile stay as consistent as we've seen historically with 3 versus 2, then we'll consider taking 3 into ulcerative colitis as well over time. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. It also gives clinicians a lot of flexibility in terms of treatment. So we think that's going to be important over the long haul.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Amit.
Your next question comes from the line of Kennen MacKay from RBC Capital Markets. Your line is open.
Hey, guys. Hey, Amit. Thanks for hosting the call and taking our questions. Maybe on atopic derm, again, we'd just love to get your ever-evolving sense of sort of how this landscape is shaking out as it relates to orals and some of the recent JAK inhibitor approvals, and maybe how that's setting the stage for the S1P class and etrasimod here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's the atopic derm market, as we know, has substantially more moderate to severe patients than say ulcerative colitis or rheumatoid arthritis. And we know that despite Dupixent's fantastic success with their own data suggest they've only penetrated less than 5% of the moderate to severe population. And as we continue to research and understand physician practice and behavior, what we see is that the advent of oral agents with a safety profile similar to etrasimod are well poised to be earlier used in the atopic derm population. We know that some of the other oral classes in development have significant safety issues, as we've seen and continue to evolve, including increases in cardiac events, increases in DTE risk, and of course increases in malignancy, even as compared to the anti-TNFs. So again, we think and we continue to believe that the positioning of etrasimod long-term in the atopic derm market is very favorable as a once-a-day oral with IGA scores in line with Dupixent from our phase 2 studies, with all the caveats of cross-trial comparisons, and being able to see safety profile that's, again, consistent with what we've seen with etrasimod historically. So we remain incredibly optimistic about where this product will fit and about the market opportunity and chance to really impact disease for these patients.
Operator, can we go to the next question?
Your next question comes from the line of Joel Beatty from Citi. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. The first one is on the 3 milligram arm of the Crohn's disease trial. Is there a potential to see any of the lymphopenia discontinuations that we saw in the phase 2 atopic dermatitis study? And then the second question is on the olorinab readout coming up in the IBS pain. Is there any reason to expect there might be differences in results in IBS-C versus IBS-D?
Hi, Joel. Thanks for your question. On the lymphopenia issue, as you'll recall, in about 30 sites in the atopic derm study, we had these discontinuations primarily at a single site. A single investigator accounted for a bulk of these patients that had the discontinuation. So we don't think this is a broader etrasimod issue. In fact, across over 500 clinical sites across all the other programs, we're not seeing any patterns even remotely consistent with that. So, I'd be careful not to extrapolate too much from predominantly a single site at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. As far as 3 milligrams, we know that it drives about 12 to 13% additional lymphocyte decreases from our healthy volunteer study, from our phase 1 study, and we don't think that will get a disproportionate amount of patients into a grade 4 lymphopenia. Recall that the discontinuations, again, predominantly at a single site, were at a grade 3 lymphopenia, which was a protocol violation. So, again, we're not seeing grade 4 lymphopenias with 2 milligrams, and with the nominal change in lymphocyte reductions from 2 to 3 milligrams, we don't expect to see much there either. So again, we didn't see it in our healthy volunteer study, and we don't expect to see this as a systematic issue across the trials. And sorry, Joel, could you repeat your second question, please?
Yeah, thanks for those details. And then the other question was on olorinab and any differences to expect from IBS-C versus IBS-D.
Yeah, so IBS-D has historically been tougher to treat on the APS scale, and whereas you see placebo just at about a 1-point change across all the major programs, somewhere in that range. On the IBS-C setting, you see something in the 0.5 to 0.8 change compared to placebo on the IBS-D. So you do see what seems to be directionally a slightly more difficult to treat population. So we'll see how the data plays out. I think the big difference is most of the other programs that have been tried in the pain setting have predominantly been used to impact the motility. And then the pain is a secondary component. Here, pain is the primary component. It is the number one reason these patients see a gastroenterologist. Accounts for 70% of gastroenterology visits have to do with abdominal pain. So thinking about pain first here, we think will result in a slightly different approach, as opposed to thinking about the motility benefits first and then pain secondarily. But we'll see that when we see the data. But we do expect those patient populations to be different. They have reacted differently in previous clinical programs.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Joel.
Your next question comes from the line of Yatin Suneja from Guggenheim Partners. Your line is open.
Hey guys, thank you for taking my question. 2 for me. First on the CR formulation, can you maybe give us an update where you are with regard to the AD study? Are you going to take CR formulation in AD? And then on olorinab side, I think in the phase 2A, there was not a clear dose response, but was a very nice PK-dependent response after each dose. So just trying to get a sense of, what level of receptor occupancy you need to achieve, at what dose you think you could achieve that effect in this bigger study. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the questions. On the CR, we're continuing our work on the CR formulation, manufacturing, stability, additional studies that have to get done. As we've said previously, we expect to bridge into the atopic derm study. It will not be ready for the beginning of the atopic derm study, but we'll be able to bridge into the phase 3, and that's our current plan and working assumptions, and that's what we're working toward. On the Olorinib phase 2A study, we knew that the 25 milligram arm achieved sufficient receptor coverage, and then for safety, we took up to 100 milligram arm, and we didn't see a difference between 25 and 100, as you pointed out. For the phase 2B, we took one dose below the 25 and one dose above, so we really do hope to see a little bit of a dose response. And again, that 25 was sort of the anchor for receptor coverage. So again, we'll see that data when we see that data. But that was the idea coming out of the phase 2A study.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Your next question comes from the line of Joseph Stringer from Needham & Company. Your line is open.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking our questions, and congrats on the progress. For the phase 2 alopecia readout later this year, can you help kind of frame expectations around the data readout and what's considered a clinically meaningful SALT score, and perhaps tie that into the responder analysis on the secondary endpoints? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So as you know, there's different types of alopecia areata, and you move toward universalis and totalis and different types of alopecia. So there's going to be a mixed bag of patients in this small phase 2A exploratory trial. We'll be looking for a 20, 30, 40% improvement. We think those are meaningful improvements on the overall SALT scores across these different patient populations. Again, the objective of the phase 2A is to inform a phase 2B program and help us understand which patients are more likely to respond and have a benefit with etrasimod. So that's kind of what we'll be looking at. Again, categorically, a percentage of patients that achieve a SALT 50 would be a meaningful, or SALT 30 would be a meaningful result. Just like we did with the phase 2A study on Olorinib, let's be cautious in over-interpreting small phase 2A studies. They're designed to really help us inform the next clinical step in the program and help us identify the right patients to move forward with. So, again, we think the biology is extremely intriguing. We know that CD4, CD8 positive T lymphocytes are cytotoxic at the hair follicle level. We know they travel there on the S1P1 gradient. We can stain for it, and so we can clearly see that it's an on-target mechanism, and now we'd like to see a clinical response across different subsets of these patients, so we can begin to educate ourselves on where to go forward on a phase 2B program. So excited to see that data, and again, we'll be looking for a change in that SALT score compared to placebo, and it'll differ by the subsets of patients we'll be looking at.
Next question comes from the line of Jason Gerberry from Bank of America. Your line is open.
Oh, hi, good afternoon. This is Chian for Jason. Thanks for taking our questions. Two questions. First one on Crohn's. Maybe just a follow-up on your expectation. I think people are inherently going to do cross-trial comparison versus ozanimod phase 2 data, which is also an open label. Can you talk about your expectation? You're looking for something comparable to ozanimod, or are you looking at something potentially better in the Crohn's phase 2 readout? And then second question on etrasimod control release. If you do end up seeing a stronger signal with this 3 milligram, would you be able to formulate the CR formulation for both the 2 milligram and the 3 milligram dose? Thanks.
Hi, Chi. Thanks for your questions. On the Crohn's, given the broad range of inherent advantages we have over ozanimod, from faster onset to faster offset to no titration schedule, to seeing, single-digit heart rate changes with the absence of a titration schedule, not to mention the metabolite issue and the drug-drug interaction issue advantages that we have. We think, at least for this first Crohn's study, being able to see an effect that's commensurate with ozanimod would be a great outcome for us. Naturally, with 2 and 3 milligrams, we'd like to be able to see potentially 3 milligrams show an increase over 2 milligrams and be able to see a dose response. So I think if we saw those things, I think we could call that a very successful win in that program. For the CR formulation, absolutely. We're starting with the 2 milligram, but once we're at that place where we can begin to confidently replicate what we saw in the original studies into actual tablets and into human clinical studies, taking that from 2 to 3 milligrams is definitely in the plan. And again, we want to see that 2 and 3 milligram dose response in the Crohn's before we make that call, because there's no point in spending a bunch of money making a 3 milligram CR formulation if we're at some kind of plateau effect between 2 and 3 milligrams. So we're going to let the data lead us there. Again, we'll be looking at 3 milligrams not only in Crohn's but potentially in our atopic derm work as well. And as a consequence, we'll have multiple data points in which to inform whether we take the CR into 3 milligrams. But it's absolutely feasible. There's nothing technically not feasible about doing that.
Got it. Thank you.
Your next question comes from the line of Joseph Schwartz from SVB Leerink. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks very much. A couple questions on the Elevate studies. I believe you've said that the baseline characteristics in these studies are fairly similar to those who you enrolled in Oasis, with maybe a slight skew towards more biologic-naive patients. This strikes me as a bit counterintuitive, since biologics have gained more share over time, and I would think that the pandemic would tend to select for more severe treatment-experienced patients who might be more motivated. Can you speak to that apparent paradox and maybe talk about the sites that have enrolled the most patients and how they might compare to those who were involved in Oasis in terms of anything like geography, experience with IBD trials, any other aspects that might influence the results?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. The baseline characteristics we haven't disclosed as being similar to Oasis. What we've disclosed is that the inclusion criteria were similar to Oasis and have been across most of the phase 2 and 3 trials done in the contemporary patients population. The only baseline characteristics which we provided is this 70-30 kind of range, and as you'll note, ozanimod had about the same, albeit 6 to 12 months before us. So pandemic notwithstanding, when you run programs, small phase 2 programs, which are predominantly U.S., maybe some European sites, Western, Eastern European sites, and you get to what we saw, which is a 60-40 split, and then when you go more global, you get to closer to 70-30 split, and that's consistent across all the programs that we've seen. So again, ozanimod ended up with the exact same split we did. So we don't think that's much of a paradox. Our data that we've shared for the last couple of years, we've run the study a couple of times, does suggest that even in major markets, 2 out of 3 moderate to severe UC patients have never received a biologic or an advanced therapy. So that's pretty consistent with what we think the contemporary market looks like, is in that 65 to 70% range. We think that's consistent. In terms of site selection, there is just a handful of sites around the world. A handful is probably the wrong word, but there is a finite subset of sites around the world that can effectively run these studies. And one of the challenges has been historically that everyone's in the same sites running the same study. So we're really pleased to be able to be in those sites, the experienced sites around the world, using CROs that have conducted many of the other phase 3 investigations in the ulcerative colitis space, and still be able to maintain enrollment timelines. As you know, the endoscopies are locally conducted but centrally read, and that's a critical quality assurance metric across all of these programs. So we feel good about the site selection. We feel good about the inclusion criteria we have for the studies, and we sort of let it kind of play out the way it was going to play out. We didn't try to enrich for more naive patients, for example. And I think what we're seeing is a pretty contemporary patient population that's, again, supported by the market research we've conducted over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That's really helpful. Thanks. And then I know you continue to monitor the impact of potential resurgence in this pandemic. So I was just wondering if you could give us an updated assessment of how it's impacted data collection so far, in terms of any colored commentary around discontinuations or the potential, the transition of patients from the induction to the maintenance phase of your seamless study.
Yeah, I think all we've shared publicly is that the discontinuation rates, interruptions, and all the other pre-planned parameters that we track on an ongoing basis, all of those metrics are below our pre-planned statistical expectations. So, for example, discontinuations and interruptions are well below our pre-planned statistical expectations. Patients moving from 12 to the longer studies, patients kind of moving forward, again, those are at or above our pre-planned statistical expectations across the board. So we're monitoring this incredibly carefully in terms of study conduct. From day one was our primary area of worry, and we're watching, as we have been since the beginning of the pandemic, every patient, every site, every country, every day.
Thanks again. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Your next question comes from the line of Jessica Fye from JP Morgan. Your line is open.
Hi, guys. This is Daniel for Jessica Fye. Thanks for taking our questions. In this scenario where you see greater than 2-point placebo-corrected signal on AAPS in one group, either IBS-C or IBS-D, what does it mean in terms of your plans to advance the program forward? Will you still take the product in both populations?
Yeah, it depends what we see in the IBS-D, right? That, like I said, the bar is much lower in the IBS-D setting. Most products are well below 1 point corrected change, a placebo-corrected change. So seeing something north of 1 in the D space is very remarkable. Seeing something north of 1.5 in the C space is quite substantial. So they both, I think the previous question was asked around the same area, which is the thresholds are a little different for those two. So let's take a look at the data, and then we'll make a judgment call about where we go next and how we evaluate the program. It's premature until we see the data to be able to really understand where we go next. We can hypothesize around, is 1 good or 1.5 good, but again, the bar, we could say unequivocally, the bar in IBS-D is much lower, and so it doesn't have to be 2 across the board.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
Your next question comes from the line of Patrick Trucchio from H.C. Wainwright. Your line is open.
Thanks. Good afternoon. First, can you give us an update on the status of the Gladiator study with etrasimod in mild to moderate UC, and how this trial is overall, how important this trial is overall in positioning of etrasimod in what's becoming increasingly competitive UC market?
Hi, Pat. Really appreciate it. Great question on Gladiator, and thanks for bringing it up. It's one of our favorite topics. The Gladiator program, as you'll recall, is designed to treat more of the moderate patient population, patients who might not otherwise qualify for Elevate 12 or 52. And so the Gladiator program is up and running. Sites are being initiated. We'll continue to provide progress updates. As you know, we don't provide enrollment updates, but we'll continue to provide broad progress updates on the program. It is being run at an overlap subset of the sites that are running 12 and 52. So as the 52 study moves over to 12 and the 12 study continues to enroll in patients don't qualify for 12, those patients will be self-selecting into the Gladiator program. The reason this is important comes back to something I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is despite the broad penetration of biologics, 2 out of 3 moderate to severe patients still haven't received an advanced therapy, and they tend to be more on the moderate population. So they're not captured in the clinical studies. These are patients with significant rectal bleeding, stool frequency. They have active ulceration on endoscopy, but not severe enough to actually qualify for the clinical study. So those are the patients that we'd be going after with Gladiator. The market essentially doubles with a successful Gladiator outcome, and we think that's very significant. And being at the forefront of addressing these patients, we think makes this landmark study very important to our long-term desire to make etrasimod a standard of care in ulcerative colitis.
That's helpful. And then just kind of a bigger picture question, how should we be thinking about the strategy going forward with regard to therapeutic area focus and potential collaborations, specifically with the 3 areas of GI, derm, and cardio building out? I'm wondering if there's a preference on which of these areas make sense to keep within Arena's control versus collaborating on, and how we should think about potential commercial collaborations of various compounds in development.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I would say that one of the things advantages we have is that this is a staggered build. UC comes first, then we start entering into dermatology with some additional GI indications coming after that, including Crohn's and EoE, and then we enter cardiology into phase 3. So, not all of these programs are running at the same pace. The cardiovascular indications are just initiating phase 2 now, so they won't be in phase 3 until we're well out of phase 3 in these other indications. So it's not a fair assumption to make that we're going to have to make portfolio choices today. We'll definitely be in a situation where we'll have to make portfolio choices in the future, potentially. And if things go as we hope and anticipate, then building our cardiovascular, we think will be an important leg of the stool long term. So it gives us an important consideration in terms of the 5 to 10 year footprint of the company, and I know that's beyond the scope of most of the investors you guys talk to, but we're thinking in that time horizon about how to build a company. And if you really want to build a company, having single assets that have binary outcomes are not the right way to go. You want to have a broad and diverse portfolio. You want to be in multiple therapeutic areas where you think there's provocative unmet medical need, where you think you've got key competitive advantages, and that you can actually execute by yourself. And we think we can execute each of these therapeutic areas by ourselves, and that's a big consideration before we go into an area. As you know, we licensed out our PAH asset to United Therapeutics. That's a highly specialized area, and United Therapeutics has incredible skills and breadth and scope of knowledge with that physician community and that patient population, and we felt that product was better in the hands of a partner. We recently spun out our Arena Neuroscience, now called Longboard Therapeutics, or Longboard Pharmaceuticals, and that's again a therapeutic area that we chose not to be into directly, and we thought it required a different level of focus, and we were able to spin that out. So we've continued to make prudent pipeline decisions and prudent prioritization decisions, and holding on to the things that we think we can execute over the mid to long term. So that's really been the strategy.
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
Your next question comes from the line of Chris Howerton from Jefferies. Your line is open.
Hey there, thanks for taking the questions. I mean, frankly, I think most of them have been asked at this point, but maybe just a couple from me. One would be, obviously you're in a great cash position, but what is your view of cash runway, and kind of does this get us to the point of ulcerative colitis commercialization? And then the second question, I was actually just reviewing your transcript from the JP Morgan conference earlier this year, and you were kind of talking about your ESG report. I must admit I haven't had a chance to review that, so I was just curious, maybe Ahmed, if you could give us a couple highlights from that report this year.
Sure. So let me take the ESG, and then I'll hand that to Lori to talk about cash runway. On the ESG side, we issued a 2020 ESG report last year, and so feel free to peruse that. We took a lot of pride in going through the audit process internally. We had multiple conversations at the board level in terms of the importance of ESG long term. Many of our shareholders, as you know, are long shareholders. We have a considerable amount of European shareholders, and we take their concerns very seriously. So we started on this process 2 years ago in terms of understanding what it means for a smaller company like ourselves to be highly engaged and active in managing our broader footprint, our environmental, social, and governance footprint. And we've made critical improvements based on that feedback between 20 and 21, and we'll be issuing our 2021 report later this year. So you'll be able to read a second report. So we're extremely excited by that. This has governance up to the board or oversight up to the board level. We've got an internal executive level sponsorship on this, and again, we're constantly trying to make sure we're improving who we are as a company and what our footprint is long term. And we think that's important for building a sustainable, vibrant company. Lori, do you want to take the cash runway question?
Sure, absolutely. So we ended the year with $1.1 billion in cash. We landed our operating burn as we had predicted, about $353 million. We haven't guided yet for 2021, but as you can imagine, our expenses are continuing to grow. We are in a number of phase 3 programs, and we're looking out to the planning of the AD program as well as progressing the pipeline. So it's a more complicated picture than just a straight calc on cash burn, but certainly we have cash to get us in to that commercialization point.
Okay. Well, like I said, I think most of the questions have been asked already. Appreciate you taking them. And Ahmed, for what it's worth, I think you're building a great company, and the ESG report, I look forward to reviewing it and seeing just that.
Cool. Welcome your feedback. Thanks so much.
Your next question comes from the line of David Wong from SMBC. Your line is open.
Hey guys, thanks for taking the question and fitting me in. Just had a lot, obviously has been addressed by the prior questions, but maybe a follow-up on the UC Gladiator study. Have you talked about whether this could be a, registrational in terms of, putting forth an approval in the mild moderate population? And then on timing there, do you think that you might be first to market, given there are a few phase 2 oral assets also looking at the mild moderate space?
Yeah. So is this by itself a pivotal study? That's a conversation we'll have to have with the agency. No one's generated a broad data set here. We've seen smaller studies generate some anecdotal information, I'll call it. But in terms of running a large-scale, multi-center, global clinical investigation in the same scale and scope as Elevate, no one's done that. So we think we've got at least the opportunity to have this be a single pivotal, and the question is, will we need a second pivotal if we were going to make it a registrational trial? I think more importantly, we've spent a lot of time with the payer community. We've probably had about 24 meetings with key payers around the country. We've taken their input into the design of the Gladiator program, and that's been a big driver of generating this information. Not only does it double the eligible population in this space, but it begins to create a provocative case for the payers to have a preferred position for etrasimod. So we think it's important for multiple points of view, and I don't see anybody else running large-scale global phase 3 equivalent type trials like we are running with Gladiator. So I think we are, at or near the forefront of exploring this population.
Okay, great. And then I just want to touch on the cardiovascular assets. I know the readouts are still a little ways off, but was just wondering if you would be able to maybe preview, the design and endpoints for APD 418 as well as the new asset, Timanagro.
Sure. So Timanagro both have fast track designation, and we're moving both into phase 2. Just to recap, Timanagro, we're taking the microvascular obstruction. We'll be looking at a subset of patients. We'll be looking at patients, and we'll be looking at actual resistance as measured quantitatively distal to the site of the occlusion, and in those patients, and so that's really designed a study. It'll be in an international cath lab, and then similarly in the APD-401 space, those will also be in an international cath lab with as quantitative a set of metrics as we can possibly develop in that setting. Again, we're trying to look for real clear measures there of cardiac output and ejection fraction and no change in hemodynamics. So we'll be able to do that again in a control setting. So both those studies are really designed as very important proof of concept studies to begin to inform and work with the agency on where to go next in terms of a registrational program. And both those data readouts are in the 22 timeframe.
Okay. Thanks so much for taking the questions, and congrats on the continued progress.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Your next question comes from the line of Prakhar Agrawal from Jones Trading. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions, and congrats on all the progress. I had a couple on EOE. What doses are you testing in the phase 2 Voyage trial? And what's the bar for success for etrasimod here in terms of reduction in eosinophilic count relative to what has been shown by some of the injectables such as Dupixent? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So we'd love to see efficacy in the same range. Biologically, from what we've done in animal experiments, we don't see any reason that etrasimod would be substantially worse than the biologics. And with the advantage of a once-a-day oral, we think that's quite meaningful. And of course, it's, eosinophilic esophagitis opens up the door to other eosinophilic GI conditions for us to explore over time. So we think it's incredibly exciting and supported by the biology we have done to date. And we'll be exploring 1 and 2 milligrams in that Voyage study. And that is a phase 2b study, so it should yield a sufficient amount of information to be able to move forward into a registrational trial from there.
Your next question comes from the line of Jim Birkenough from Wells Fargo Securities. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. This is Yan Zhu on for Jim. So first, a question on the Elevate 52 trial design. This trial has a treat-through design, and it's different from the typical induction, then re-randomization, then maintenance type of UC trial design. So I was just wondering, because with the typical traditional design, they typically add more patient at the re-randomization step just to make up for the loss of non-responders. And certainly by definition, their maintenance phase of the study starts with all patients being responders. And how, with your treat-through design, I was wondering how does that impact the powering of the study for the 52-week endpoint? Because obviously you didn't add any new patients, and there are patients who don't respond from the outset of the study. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. The reason we did the treat-through design after consultation with both U.S. and European regulatory authorities is that it more closely mimics real life, right? In the real world, you don't start re-randomizing responders and seeing drop-offs and adding more patients and over-enriching your population for your maintenance phase. Patients who do well on the drug stay on the drug for an extended period of time. It's also important to remember the historical context. The treat-through re-randomization dichotomy really goes back to the early biologics that had a different dose for induction versus maintenance. So what you had to do is you had to induce a remission at, in the case of infliximab at a higher dose, 5 to 10 mg per kg, and then reduce down to 3 mg per kg. And that's why that study design originally came to bear. You're right. It does require to maintain the same powering. It requires more patients. You have more drop-offs, and you have about a 6 to 9 month delay in the middle as patients get re-randomized. So the treat-through design is just more efficient all the way around. We can achieve the same powering with a smaller subset of patients with less dropouts, and importantly, not lose 6 to 9 months in the middle. So it's a more streamlined trial design, and from our conversations with the agency and working through the statistical plan, we're able to accomplish more with less, and that, I think that's really important. It also gives physicians a much more clear picture of what the real world looks like in terms of maintenance, and we think that's going to be a competitive advantage.
Got it. That's very helpful. And then a couple of questions on the AD side of the AD program. Obviously, at 1 mg, you have like a 30% lymphocyte reduction, and 2 mg you might have a 13% incremental reduction. And this is a first-in-class study for the S1P mechanism in AD. Is it surprising to you that the 1 mg or a 30% lymphocyte reduction on average didn't result in an efficacy signal, kind of a step function response, if you may? And then also, as you increase the dose, I think you have talked about you want to explore higher doses. While you increase the dose and trying to maintain the same efficacy profile, does it make sense to have kind of a personalized dosing guided by the peripheral lymphocyte reduction? Thanks.
Yeah, so let me start with debunking a preconceived notion. Lymphocyte reductions are not a sole PD marker for this drug. The drug has multiple modes of action, including, we know, activity against other cell types like dendritic cells and keratinocytes. So to over-fixate on lymphocyte counts is incorrect, just in general, and it's something that just is something we continue to spend time in educating investors on. We know from historical analysis that lymphocyte counts across all trials, all drugs in the same category, really only account for about 50% of the effect size. So there's multimodal activity. For example, S1P1 plays a critical role in cell-cell junctional barriers and being able to close cell-cell junctional proteins. And we know S1P2 off-target activity, as we've seen with competitive products, open cell-cell junctional proteins. So it's important to remember that just focusing on lymphocyte counts by themselves is probably over-reading a PD marker in terms of what's going on. We also know that different therapeutic areas require different doses across all the different trials. The most recent data with the JAK inhibitors, for example, use a 3-fold higher dose for the ulcerative colitis trial than they did in their rheumatology trials. There were upadacitinib, for example, is 7 and 15 milligrams, and now they're up to 45 milligrams, and they pushed those high doses in the AD trials as well. So there's a broad range of dosing based on the indications you go after. And your point's a great one, which is, yes, we're the first ones to go into atopic derm with an S1P modulator, and one of the key lessons learned is we probably need to have more drug on board in the dermatologic setting, specifically atopic derm, as we think about these indications. And that's nothing new. We know that different indications, different autoimmune conditions react to different doses with different drugs. And that's been consistent going all the way back to the early anti-TNF days.
Got it. Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more questions at this time. Turning the call back over to Mr. Amit Munshi, President and CEO.
Great. Hey, thanks everybody for joining our call today. Hope everyone's staying safe. The 2020 was a difficult year. I just want to really call out our team at ARNA for their focus and their resiliency and the energy to get things done. It was a Herculean effort, and we continue to drive that momentum forward into 2021. And we look forward to staying in touch with everybody as we continue to drive on key catalysts over the next 12 months. So thanks again, and look forward to talking soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference call. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.